the German foreign minister who declared that we are in a war against Russia, Annalena Baerbock, she's from the Green Party of Germany.
Yeah.
And it might seem out of whack for people to hear a Green Party member declaring, a war on Russia. Like, what does that have to do with the Green Party? So, can you explain that for us? How is it that the Green Party of Germany is so devoted to a neocon proxy war against Russia?
Well, the Green Party is one of the most hypocritical parties on the planet. The only other party I can think of that's as hypocritical is the U.S. Democratic Party and the Israeli Labor Party, just because they're such warmongers. And it had a resurgence in the 2021 federal elections with Annalena Baerbock, this young, telegenic female, environmentalist, self-proclaimed feminist, and Robert Habeck, who was also ardent environmentalist pushing green energy, leading the party, but they represented the sort of moderate faction that wanted to take the party back to national prominence. And that meant betraying pretty much all of their campaign promises. They won 15%, as I point out here in this thread, in the federal elections in 2021 and came into power through the in coalition with the SPD of Olaf Scholz, which won 25%. And the funny thing is, this is first of all a commentary on German democracy, or the lack thereof, that a party that wins 15% gets to install a foreign minister who, you just look at Annalena Baerbock. She's so much like Sanna Marin or these characters, these World Economic Forum characters that are brought up in the mold of Hillary Clinton, who are complete warmongers, who've never seen the face of battle, who have never been on the battlefield, probably can't even shoot a weapon, and are just the embodiment of liberal hypocrisy. But winning 15% of the vote, you get a foreign minister who unilaterally declares war on Russia, just gets to say that unilaterally. And you have Robert Habeck, who is an environmentalist who, as I point out here, winds up bowing to the Qatari trade minister on a trip to Doha. Why? Because they cut off all of the energy from Russia. The U.S. blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. It obviously did, with no protest from the foreign minister or Habeck. And all of those green sources of energy can't fill the gap. So they have to go begging for fossil fuels. And the German coal industry experiences a renaissance. They're bringing coal-fired plants back online after the Green Party took them off. And the Green Party, so foolish that they also reject nuclear energy, which is carbon-free. So Michael Tracy made some really interesting points as well about the Green Party, that they ran in 2021 by deceiving their own voters. German Green Party manifesto in the 2021 election called for banning export of arms and military equipment into war zones. Ukraine is a war zone. They won 118 seats on this pledge, entered the ruling coalition, and are now the government's most hardcore proponents of exporting arms into war zones. And here's, Tracy excerpts a piece of the Green platform. Here's a quote. Germany should be a driving force in the political de-escalation of conflict. The Green Party manifesto reads, raising the question of whether the party now views Leopard tanks as new cutting-edge political de-escalation devices, because the Green Party is now, under Baerbock and Habeck, the most forceful supporters of sending these tanks to Ukraine. They call for disarmament in the manifesto, and they call for a feminist foreign policy, adoption of which is mandatory. But those are sort of empty words, because as we know from the propaganda we got on the need to go into Afghanistan, waging war on Afghan farmers with drones, F-16s, and tanks and constant surges was being done to save Afghan women from their own people. So this could be read as sort of a R2P, humanitarian interventionist language. But the point is, the Green Party are one of the most hypocritical parties in the world, and they are driving Germany into a state of war that takes it past the post-war Rubicon and where most German voters want to go or ever thought they would go. Annalena Baerbock is the most militaristic German foreign minister since Ribbentrop.
Yeah, and the symbolism, not just of German tanks going into Ukraine to once again fight Russia, as happened in World War II, but German tanks being sent to Ukraine to support a military that has formally incorporated a neo-Nazi battalion in its ranks, the Azov Battalion. I mean, the first part, the World War II analogy, we're allowed to mention. People talk about that, but what they don't mention is the even, I think, more damning irony that Germany is arming a military that has incorporated neo-Nazis. Doesn't mean the entire Ukrainian military is neo-Nazis, but there is a neo-Nazi element. We were once allowed to acknowledge that. The New York Times used to call the Azov Battalion openly neo-Nazi. Now they're just the Azov Battalion, or even the celebrated Azov Battalion. That's a fact.
And the New York Times called them the celebrated Azov Battalion.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So that's a fact, and that's just one more aspect of the dangers here of arming a neo-Nazi infested army. That's where we're at. And on the topic of Nord Stream 2, we've just had what I think is another admission of guilt from the U.S. In terms of who was responsible for bombing that pipeline and sabotaging it, because Victoria Nuland, the top U.S. State Department official, well known for her role in the 2014 U.S.-backed Maidan coup when she was caught on tape plotting with the U.S. ambassador who would be the next Ukrainian leader, she testified at a Senate hearing, and she came under questioning by Ted Cruz. And Ted Cruz was angry at Nuland and the Biden administration because Ted Cruz was trying to make the case that had the Biden administration agreed to impose the sanctions he wanted on the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline between Germany and Russia, that had those sanctions gone through, then Russia, in his view, would not have invaded Ukraine. And he was trying to get Nuland to admit to this. And the reason why this has been such a passion project for people like Ted Cruz and other neocons is this has nothing to do with a Russian invasion of Ukraine, because well before this, they've been trying to kill the Nord Stream 2 because they all recognize that if Germany and Russia have closer energy ties, then that will threaten the supremacy of the U.S. because it's been a long time goal. And we're going to talk more about this in a second. It's been a long time U.S. goal to sever any kind of relationship between Germany and Russia, because if you have these two countries working together where Germany is the biggest power in Western Europe, the sort of economic engine of Europe, it's very difficult to wage destabilization or regime change campaigns against Russia because Germany is dependent on Russia for cheap energy. And so there's been a long time attempt to kill the Nord Stream 2 to prevent closer energy ties, and that took a major step forward when finally Germany canceled the Nord Stream 2 around the time of Russia's invasion. But just to make sure, a few months ago, the Nord Stream 2 was bombed. And Victoria Nuland was asked about this by Ted Cruz, and this is how she responded.
Whoops.
Senator Cruz, like you, I am, and I think the administration is very gratified to know that Nord Stream 2 is now, as you like to say, a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea. Senator Cruz,
watch that again.
Like you, I am, and I think the administration is very gratified to know that Nord Stream 2 is now, as you like to say, a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea.
So there it is. And before I actually comment on that, just a quick correction about something I said earlier. Gerhard Schroeder was SPD, but came to power thanks to support from the Greens and was in coalition with the Greens. So we'll edit that in post. Victoria Nuland is basically saying we did it in so many ways. And we were told, Aaron, that the Russian military did this somehow, or that Russian intelligence did this somehow. When I Googled who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, Google told me the Russian Federation. So I guess Victoria Nuland's just happy that Putin blew up his own pipeline here. She's just patting Putin on the back.
Maybe they conspired. Maybe we need Robert Mueller on the case, because if Russia did it, if Russia had bombed the pipeline, but Victoria Nuland and the Biden administration are happy about it, that means their interests are aligned. So maybe they conspired, and we need a new Mueller investigation. Yeah, that's an admission of guilt. I mean, there have been many others, starting with Antony Blinken, who right after the Nord Stream 2 pipeline was bombed, he called it a tremendous strategic opportunity. And we have the clip if we want to watch it.
And well, Yeah, we'll play that, but it's also, speaking of strategic opportunity, she's under questioning by Ted Cruz, senator from Texas, gets a lot of his funding from Houston and Dallas, from the LNG industry, from the domestic oil and gas industry in the US, which is filling the gap for Europe and making a ton of money. So this has been a great opportunity for US oil producers.
That's another interest I forgot to mention. You're exactly right. So killing the Nord Stream 2 makes Germany need to go elsewhere for energy sources. And where they've turned so far is to US LNG, which has been selling it to Germany and Europe at like a 4-time markup, like 4 times the price of LNG is what Germany and others have been paying for it, because it's expensive to ship it across the Atlantic Ocean. That's why it makes no sense for it to be happening in the first place. And that's why they had to bomb the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, just to make sure that Germany doesn't come to its senses and turns back to Russia.
Yeah, I mean, the Baerbock's predecessor, Steinmeier, was adamant about building Nord Stream 2 because it would just be so much more expensive to get gas shipped over. I mean, it just didn't make practical sense.
Yeah.
I always saw it as a peace pipeline. I mean, we don't want Germany and Russia to be fighting. That's what we saw during World War II. And now, well, people like Tony Blinken, who I call Tony Blinkskrieg, they do.
Yeah.
And here's one reason why.
Ultimately, this is also a tremendous opportunity. It's a tremendous opportunity to once and for all remove the dependence on Russian energy, and thus to take away from Vladimir Putin the weaponization of energy as a means of advancing his imperial designs. That's very significant, and that offers tremendous strategic opportunity for the years to come. But meanwhile, we're determined to do everything we possibly can to make sure that the consequences of all of this are not borne by citizens in our countries, or for that matter, around the world.
And we're going to start by selling you our gas at a quadruple factor markup. That's how we're going to help you out.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
And Tony Blinken's his I think it was his graduate thesis was on the Siberian pipeline crisis. I want to bring that up really. Here it is. Ally versus ally. The Siberian pipeline crisis was over the CIA bombing a Soviet pipeline from the Arctic region, I believe. And Tony Blinken thanked in his book Richard Pipes. I read the acknowledgments. I didn't have time to dig into the book, but he thanked in his book Richard Pipes, who's the father of Daniel Pipes and was one of the hardcore Kremlinologists who was pushing for heightened conflict with the Soviet Union. He referred to him as kind of a mentor. But I mean, Blinken's first book is on a very remarkably similar, eerily similar incident. And as such, his commentary there was just so cynical about this being a tremendous opportunity. And before Victoria Nuland's comments, Aaron, the USAID's chief administrator for Eastern Europe, I think her name is Erin McKee, spoke, and she was touting all of the efforts that USAID is making, along with presumably US corporations, to bring alternative energy sources to places like Moldova and the Baltic states and all of these other countries that are impacted by the shutoff in Russian gas. So basically what she's saying is we're hooking up corporate America in these regions where we have cut off a much cheaper source of gas. And people there are, in the meantime, suffering.
Yeah, and Victoria Nuland during this hearing also mentioned speaking to her contacts in Europe who've told her that their energy bills are now 3 times higher. And Nuland's conclusion of that was that this is a good example of why, Europe is waking up to the fact that they can't depend on Russian energy. But what cut off Russian energy was U.S. sanctions and a U.S. decision to reject any pre-invasion diplomacy and to basically opt for a proxy war. And the fact that friends of hers are suffering energy bills that are 3 times as high she doesn't seem to make the connection between policies she's pushed, her desire to break Europe from Russian energy, and the fact they're not paying higher bills.
Right.